"Sir, you need to move." The words cut through the luxury of first class like a blade, sharp and cold. Every head turned toward the calm black man seated in 1A. Michael Turner, 44 years old, dressed in a light grey suit, his eyes steady and deep as still water. He looked up. Standing before him was Ashley Parker, 31, the flight attendant, with a thin layer of makeup and a hollow, practiced smile. "This seat is reserved for one of our special passengers," she said evenly, her voice carrying the emptiness of a policy she knew was wrong. Just moments ago, the first-class cabin of Apex Air Flight 902 from Atlanta to New York had been a sanctuary of quiet elegance, the soft fizz of champagne sliding against crystal, the faint hum of jazz through the ceiling, speakers, the golden amber light bathing the fine leather seats. But now that peace had shattered, replaced by a storm of glances, curious, cautious, and quietly judgmental. A middle-aged businessman in seat 2B lifted his eyes from his laptop, frowning. A blonde woman in row 3, 28-year-old graphic designer, Chloe Adams, set her phone on the armrest and began recording. She didn't know why, but something in the attendant's tone made her uneasy. Michael didn't react right away. He calmly set down his stylus and spoke in a voice that was low, steady, and composed. "I'm sorry, there must be some mistake. This is my seat. I booked it 3 months ago." He held out his Apex Elite card and boarding pass, with his name printed clearly. For a split second, Ashley's eyes flickered with confusion, but then darkened as she glanced toward the cabin door, where a white woman in her early 50s was stepping in with an air of power. Victoria Hale, a familiar name to every crew member on the Atlanta to New York route. An investment fund director in a white blazer, her Hermes handbag glimmering beneath the cabin lights. And more importantly, she was known for her generous tips. Victoria stopped the moment she saw Michael in seat 1A. Her lips pressed together into a hard, thin line. "That's my seat," she said, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. It wasn't a request. It was a command. Ashley felt a cold bead of sweat slide beneath her uniform collar. She knew what it meant to keep someone like Victoria happy. It could be the difference between paying her student loan that month or not. But in that same instant, she met Michael's gaze. Not angry, not pleading, just a quiet steadiness that mirrored her conscience back at her. The air grew thick. Ashley swallowed hard. "Mr. Turner, it seems there's been a system error. We need you to move to another seat to make room for our special guest." The word "special" landed like a hidden shove. Michael tilted his head slightly, exhaled. "I understand what you're saying, but I'm also a special guest. And I'll be staying in my seat." The words weren't loud, yet they resonated like a bell inside every person present. Outside the cabin door, the Atlanta morning sun filtered through the window, reflecting in Michael's eyes. And in those eyes, Ashley caught glimpses of a lifetime. A black boy once chased out of a supermarket for looking suspicious. A young engineer passed over for promotion for not having the right leadership image. Yet now that same man was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar tech company on his way to New York to deliver a keynote titled "Fairness in the Age of Artificial Intelligence." And here he was facing another test, not in theory, but in the cruel reality, where justice was still a luxury. Victoria exhaled sharply. "Ashley, I don't have time for this." The attendant's forced smile melted from her face. "Mr. Turner, I'm afraid you'll have to—" "No, one word. Firm, immovable." Michael didn't look at her anymore. He looked straight ahead, as if every judging glance around him were nothing but passing wind. In row 3, Chloe felt her pulse quicken. She had never seen someone stay so composed in the middle of such quiet humiliation. Instinct told her this moment mattered. Ashley stepped back, her hand tightening around her clipboard. She knew she was crossing a line, but fear of losing a tip, maybe even her job, drove her to turn away and find the cabin manager. In just a few minutes, what was happening here would no longer stay inside this plane. It would spread across social media, ignite debates about respect, equality, and the price people pay when others mistake status for worth. But right now, inside the first-class cabin of Apex Airtime, itself seemed to hang between two breaths. One man sat still, holding his seat, not just because of a ticket, but because of his dignity. One woman forced a professional smile, though her hands trembled, and another stood there, believing that money could buy everything, even the silence of justice. The engines began to hum beneath the floor. The cabin door closed, the sound of the lock clicking like the first note of a tragedy no one yet foresaw. Michael Turner closed his eyes gently, hearing his father's words echo in his mind. Never let anyone take your dignity, even when they think you don't deserve it. In row 3, Chloe stopped the recording, her hand still shaking. She didn't know who the man in front of her was, but something deep inside told her this story wouldn't end on this flight. It was about to become a symbol. And just a few minutes later, when the cabin manager and the captain arrived, that quiet storm would finally break, not with shouting, but with the unshakable silence of a man humiliated in the sky. "Mr. Turner, I need your cooperation." The voice came from Brian Cooper, 39 years old, the cabin manager stepping into the cabin with a half smile, the kind worn by those who believe their small authority is an unspoken law. Michael looked up. He was still seated in 1A, back straight, his hand resting lightly on the tablet before him. For what reason, he asked, his tone calm and low, yet enough to make a few passengers hold their breath. "We need to rearrange seating for a VIP guest," Brian replied, his eyes flicking toward Victoria Hale, who stood with her arms crossed, her Rolex watch gleaming under the cabin lights. "I'm sure you wouldn't want to delay everyone's flight." The air in the cabin thickened like smoke. Every gaze focused on the one man who refused to move. But Michael Turner didn't budge. He knew this feeling well. Years ago at 17, a supermarket employee had forced him to empty his bag of groceries he had already paid for because he didn't look like someone who could afford them. And now at 44, he was facing a different version of the same insult, dressed this time in an airline uniform and a customer service smile. "You're causing a disturbance," Brian said, his voice sharper now. "We have the right to adjust seating to ensure our guests' comfort." "I'm already comfortable," Michael replied, his voice soft, but carrying through the cabin. "I have my ticket. I have Apex's highest membership status. And there's no policy that says I must give up my seat simply because she wants it." A ripple of murmurs spread down the aisle. A businessman shook his head and muttered, "He could just move. It's not a big deal." But a woman in row 4 whispered, "This isn't right." Victoria let out a loud sigh, her tone dripping with irritation. "I have an important meeting in Manhattan. I always sit in 1A. This is unacceptable." Her eyes shifted to Ashley, a silent order. In quiet panic, Ashley turned to Brian for guidance. Brian gave a subtle nod. And then, like a reflex shaped by money, Ashley lowered herself slightly discreetly, accepting a small envelope from Victoria. Chloe Adams, the young woman in row 3, saw everything through her phone camera. Michael noticed the movement, but said nothing. He simply closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. Two opposing forces surged within him, the anger that begged to erupt and the calm forged from years of surviving injustice. He chose the latter. "Miss Parker," he said slowly, turning his gaze toward Ashley. "If I am to leave this seat, could you please tell me under what policy?" Ashley opened her mouth, but before she could speak, a deep, commanding voice interrupted. "What's going on here?" Captain Rick Dawson, 56 years old, entered with a broad frame and a neatly pressed pilot uniform. The small cabin suddenly grew heavier. Brian quickly summarized, "This passenger is refusing to change seats, sir. He's obstructing the flight." Obstructing Michael let out a faint laugh. "I'm just sitting in the seat I paid for." Rick frowned. "My crew has the authority to rearrange seating to maintain order. You're expected to comply, and if I don't, then I'll call security." In that instant, everything stopped. The only sound left was the faint hum of the ventilation system. Michael looked at the captain, the man responsible for the safety of hundreds of lives, now willing to strip a passenger of his dignity for the sake of another VIP. He shook his head slowly, his voice low but cutting through the air like steel. "You can call whoever you want." "But I'm not leaving this seat," Rick hissed through clenched teeth. "Fine." He gestured to Brian. The cabin manager immediately lifted the intercom phone, his voice tense. Requesting security assistance at gate 12, Ashley shrank back, trembling. She could feel everything spiraling out of control, but fear of losing her job held her tongue. Chloe, gripping her phone tightly, felt her heart pounding like a drum. She knew she was recording a moment that would change everything. This isn't just a passenger being removed, she thought. This is the story of an entire system. Two security officers appeared, Officer Mark Daniels, 46, with a weathered face, and Leo Kim, 34, his eyes hesitant. Daniels stepped forward, voice firm. "So please gather your belongings and come with us." Michael didn't move. He looked straight into the officer's eyes. "Can you tell me exactly what rule I've broken?" Daniels hesitated. He glanced toward Rick, who avoided his gaze. "You're causing a disturbance," Rick answered for him. "That's the reason." "No, sir," Michael replied, his voice cold as iron. "I'm being forced out because someone else wants this seat, not because I've done anything wrong." Silence. The kind of silence no one wants to touch. Finally, Michael stood up. But not in defeat. He stood because he chose to leave with his head held high. He lifted his phone and recorded every face in front of him. Brian with his strained smile, Ashley pale and shaking, Rick looking away, and Victoria settling smugly into seat 1A. "I'll leave," Michael said, his tone deep and unwavering. "But everyone here should remember this today. A passenger was removed not because he did something wrong, but because of the color of his skin." Chloe bit her lip, tears welling up. She had never heard anyone speak such truth so calmly, every word heavy with meaning. As Michael walked down the aisle, passengers moved aside. Some looked away. Some nodded faintly, as if offering a silent apology. The aircraft door opened. Light from the tarmac spilled in, glinting off his grey suit like steel beneath the sun. He walked forward, slow, steady steps. Each one a declaration, "My dignity is not for sale." Behind him, Victoria ordered another glass of champagne. Finally quiet, she said, her lips curving upward. Ashley bowed slightly, her hands trembling as she poured. But inside the cabin, no one felt quiet. Chloe stopped recording, her heart still racing. On her screen, the image of the man walking away in silence burned like a wound, and she knew this footage would change everything. At the other end of the terminal, as Michael was escorted through security, he opened his phone and brought up the unfinished presentation titled Artificial Intelligence and Human Fairness in Modern Systems. He smiled faintly, not in irony but in recognition. That speech had just begun for real. Just 6 hours after Michael Turner walked off Apex Air, Flight 902, the world knew his name. A 3-minute video, recorded by the trembling hands of Chloe Adams, was burning through every social platform. In the clip, the sharp voice of flight attendant Ashley Parker rang out, "Sir, this seat is reserved for a VIP." Then came Michael's calm, steady reply, "I'm a VIP too." That single line, simple yet piercing, became the spark for a movement. #ApexInjustice. Within 30 minutes, it climbed to the top of Twitter's trending list in the United States. 6 hours later, it was a global phenomenon. The final frame of the video showed Michael standing the light from the open aircraft door, reflecting off his grey suit as he spoke, each word clearly. "Today I was removed from my seat, not because I did something wrong, but because she believed I didn't belong here." That sentence cut through millions of screens. In just a few hours, it was shared by hundreds of public figures, artists, activists, and politicians alike. The headlines came crashing in. Black CEO removed from first-class Apex Air faces a crisis of dignity. Elsewhere in the airport, Michael sat alone in the VIP lounge. On the table, his phone vibrated non-stop, dozens of missed calls, hundreds of messages from PR agents, lawyers, journalists. But he kept his eyes fixed on the television mounted on the wall. CNN was replaying the same video. His face appeared briefly, then faded behind a scrolling headline, #ApexInjustice surpasses 10 million views in 8 hours. He said nothing. He simply took a sip of cold coffee, his eyes glowing with that quiet steadiness, the same calm that had carried him through 1,000 humiliations before. His phone lit up again. A message from Natalie Pierce, the Chief Operating Officer of Equitas AI and his closest ally for over a decade. "Michael, the video is exploding. PR suggests releasing a statement immediately. I've contacted the legal team. They say Apex Air may have violated passenger rights." He texted back, "Call an emergency meeting. Prepare shareholder documents." And Natalie, this time, they picked the wrong man to humiliate. In Dallas, inside Apex Air's headquarters, 58-year-old CEO Andrew Collins had just finished a board meeting when his assistant burst in holding an iPad. "Mr. Collins, we have a problem. Another flight delay?" He frowned. "No, sir, much worse. You need to see this." On screen, the footage played Michael's composed expression, Victoria Hale's sharp words, "That's my seat," and the calculating glance of Ashley Parker. When it ended, Andrew stood frozen. "Who did you say that passenger was?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Michael Turner, sir, CEO of Equitas AI." Andrew blinked. Equitas AI, the strategic partner about to sign a $60 million deal with Apex for customer service artificial intelligence systems. And now the CEO of that partner had been publicly humiliated by Apex staff. 2 hours later, an emergency board meeting was underway. On the 41st floor, the harsh white lights fell over pale faces. Megan Ortiz, the communications director, spoke rapidly. "We've lost 12% of our market value in 6 hours. #ApexInjustice is breaking records for viral speed." "Take the video down," Andrew snapped. "Use copyright claims, DMCA notices, whatever it takes." "We can't," Sir Megan sighed. "There are thousands of copies already. CNN, NBC, The Washington Post, they've all covered it." Andrew shot to his feet. "Get me Turner, right now." In Atlanta, Michael answered on the third ring. "Mr. Collins," he said evenly, I assume you've seen the video. Michael, I'm deeply sorry. This was a mistake made by low-level employees. Don't let a small incident ruin our partnership. We're prepared to issue a private apology and appropriate compensation. Michael let out a quiet, incredulous laugh. A small incident you call stripping someone of their dignity. A small incident. His voice dropped lower, steady as forged steel. No, Andrew, I don't want a private apology. I want public change, he ended the call. On the other end, Andrew stood speechless, and the room fell into a silence heavy as lead. Online, the outrage had transformed into a movement. Thousands shared their own experiences. I was also asked to leave my seat because I didn't look rich enough. News outlets began calling Michael the silent rebel, the man who fought back without raising his voice. Corporations started questioning Apex's employee training and ethics. The story had outgrown a single airline. It had become a test for an entire society. That night, Michael and his team gathered in the Equitas AI boardroom. The room glowed faintly, the large screen displaying live data, 22 million views, 1.3 million comments. How do we respond? Natalie asked. Michael paused, then said, We're not here for revenge. We're here to make them confront the system they built. He turned to the company's lawyer, Aaron Brooks. Prepare the shareholder documents. I want an emergency board meeting with Apex Air, and I want them to understand this isn't a negotiation. It's a lesson. The next morning, CNBC opened its broadcast with breaking news. Michael Turner, CEO of Equitas AI and a 20% shareholder of Apex Air, has called for an emergency review of the airline's corporate culture. The news hit like a second bomb. Financial markets panicked. Investors pulled out. Apex stock plunged another 8%. On the Nasdaq board, red numbers flashed endlessly. AAX 28.12, down 8.2%. Andrew Collins stared at the falling chart as if watching his own lifeblood drain away. My God, he whispered. One man, one video, and it brought an entire airline to its knees. Meanwhile, in his glass-walled office, Michael watched the morning news. His face appeared on every channel. A part of him hurt, not from the humiliation, but from how familiar it felt. Yet another part, stronger and brighter, was burning with resolve. This time he thought, we won't let this fade, after a few days of outrage. Later that morning, Natalie entered, holding out her phone. Michael, your post just hit 1 million likes. On screen was a short tweet, 37 words. I was asked to leave a seat I paid for. Not because of a mistake, but because of bias. This is not just my story, it's the story of millions. And I will not stay silent. Michael Turner. Below the post were tens of thousands of comments, messages of gratitude and shared experiences. One phrase repeated more than any other, we see you. Michael nodded quietly and closed his laptop. He knew now the fight was never about a seat on a plane. It was about a person's place in a world run by prejudice and power. Somewhere deep inside, he heard his father's voice echoing once more. Sometimes, son, you have to stay seated long enough for the world to realize it's been standing in the wrong place. And now that world was finally beginning to see it. Dallas, Monday morning. The sky was covered in a dull gray haze, mirroring the mood of the people walking into the Apex Air headquarters. On the 41st floor, the main conference room glowed with cold light. There was no laughter, no polite greetings, only the sound of laptops opening, sighs escaping, and anxious glances meeting across the table. At the head sat Andrew Collins, the company's CEO, looking years older after 2 sleepless nights. His eyes were bloodshot, his tie loose, his voice hoarse. We're losing everything: stock, value, reputation, customers. And now trust. Before him lay the latest report. Down 21% in market value, 4 partnership deals suspended, and most importantly, an emergency shareholder meeting called by Michael Turner. 9 o'clock sharp, the doors opened. No one spoke, but the air shifted immediately. Michael Turner walked in. He was wearing the same grey suit he had worn the day he was forced off the flight. Not because he lacked other clothes, but because he wanted everyone to remember that the humiliation still lingered. Behind him were Natalie Pierce, Chief Operating Officer Aaron Brooks, the lead attorney, and Jamal Wright, Director of Public Relations. They didn't say a word. They simply sat down. Andrew stood, forcing a smile. "Michael, thank you for coming. Mr. Collins." Michael interrupted, his voice calm but sharp. "We're not here for pleasantries. We're here to talk about accountability." The room fell silent. Michael opened his laptop and projected the original, unedited video onto the massive screen. No narration, no dramatic music, only the raw sounds. Ashley Parker's trembling voice. "Sir, please move. Victoria Hale's cold command. I always sit there." And then his own voice, steady, proud, unshaken. "I'm not going anywhere." In the packed conference room, no one dared to move. The video ended, leaving only the sound of their uneasy breathing. Michael stood. The light from the windows reflected on his face, making his eyes seem to burn. I stayed seated and stayed silent. Because I believed in justice. But justice doesn't appear on its own. It requires someone to demand it. He looked around the table, his tone, even each word like a nail driven into wood. "Your crew didn't just make an operational mistake. They betrayed your own company's mission, Apex Air, flying with respect. What they did was the opposite. They flew with contempt." Andrew lowered his head. "Michael, we truly don't apologize." Michael cut him off. "I'm not here for regret. I'm here to fix the system." He switched to the next slide. Statistics, public reactions, millions of comments, over 150,000 customers declaring a boycott. "This isn't just a viral video," he said. "It's evidence of a rotten culture, one where tip money outweighs human dignity." A voice broke the silence. It was Linda Torres, the chief financial officer. "But firing the entire flight crew could trigger union backlash and lawsuits. The legal costs will be enormous." Michael turned toward her, his gaze as sharp as a blade. "And what about the cost of silence? How many more people need to be humiliated before you finally learn?" Linda said nothing. Natalie spoke up, her tone cool and clear as glass. "We've reviewed all personnel files. 3 individuals are directly involved. Ashley Parker, lead flight attendant. Brian Cooper, cabin manager. And Rick Dawson, captain. All 3 violated conduct codes, accepted bribes, and abused authority toward a passenger." Jamal projected the still frame, Victoria Hale, slipping an envelope to Ashley, captured from Chloe's video. A wave of murmurs filled the room. Andrew sighed and leaned back in his chair. "I understand," he said tiredly. "What do you want?" Michael looked him straight in the eye. "I want 2 things." His voice was low measured, but carried undeniable weight. First, the immediate termination of those 3 employees, followed by a public announcement acknowledging it. Second, I want Apex Air to change, truly change. He paused, scanning the room as though delivering a verdict. "From this day forward, your airline will implement a mandatory training program on unconscious bias fairness and human dignity for all 12,000 employees, designed by my company, Equitas AI. And I will personally oversee its execution." A few shareholders murmured objections. One middle-aged man spoke up, irritated. "You're forcing us to sign a contract with your own company." Michael gave a faint smile. "I'm forcing nothing. I'm offering a choice. Reform, or I withdraw my 20% stake in Apex Air and terminate the $60 million technology deal you're depending on." The room went silent, the kind of silence that crushes sound itself. Andrew closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them slowly. He knew that losing Turner meant Apex's collapse within days. "Give me 5 minutes for an internal discussion," he said quietly. Michael nodded and stepped out to the glass balcony overlooking the distant highway. The wind from the 41st floor swept through his hair, carrying the metallic scent of a storm fading away. He thought of his father, a transport worker who had always believed that respect was the one thing no one could take from you. "Dad," he thought, "I'm reclaiming it, not just for me, but for everyone like me." 10 minutes later, the doors opened. Andrew returned to the table, his voice low but firm. "The board has voted. 7 in favor, 3 opposed. Your terms are accepted." He took a deep breath. "The 3 employees involved will be terminated immediately. Apex Air will work with Equitas AI to implement the training and cultural reform program." Michael didn't smile. He simply nodded. "Thank you. This isn't my victory. It's the beginning of justice." The meeting ended. As he walked out of the building, the Texas sun poured down on the marble steps, bright and unforgiving. Reporters were already waiting, microphones pointed toward him, voices overlapping with questions. "Mr. Turner, will you sue Apex Air? Have you forgiven them?" He stopped, looked straight into the nearest camera. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means holding people accountable so their mistakes aren't repeated. And today we've taken the first step. Flashbulbs exploded around him. For a moment, the light reflected in his eyes, the light of conviction, not victory. Inside the building, Andrew stood by the glass window, watching Michael walk away. He knew he had lost a portion of his power, but perhaps for the first time, he had regained something else, his conscience. Far away in Atlanta, Chloe Adams sat in front of her screen, watching the live press conference. She smiled through tears. She had uploaded the video only to tell the truth, never imagining it would ignite reform across an entire industry. On Twitter, a new hashtag began to rise, climbing swiftly to the top worldwide. #JusticeInFlight. Justice for the first time had taken off. That afternoon, on the 3rd floor of Apex Air headquarters, a small room was locked shut. No reporters, no cameras, only 3 people sitting in silence: Ashley Parker, Brian Cooper, and Rick Dawson. Across from them sat Karen Patel, the head of human resources, along with 2 company lawyers. The air was thick and cold, every tick of the clock landing like a heartbeat in their chests. On the table lay 3 folders with their names printed on them, heavy and unyielding, like verdicts waiting to be read. "Thank you for coming," Karen began, her tone devoid of emotion. "We'll get straight to the point." Ashley stared down at her trembling hands, the glass of water before her shaking slightly. She hadn't been able to eat all day. Every time she checked her phone, another headline appeared, another photo of her face plastered online. Flight attendant caught taking bribe, the face of prejudice. Beside her, Brian leaned back, his chin raised in defiance. "I don't understand why we're being treated like criminals. We were just following procedure." At the far end of the table sat Rick, the 56-year-old pilot with graying hair, a man who had flown for 25 years without a single complaint. Today he kept his head down, eyes hollow, like burnt-out ashes. Karen closed the file and looked at each of them in turn. Your procedure does not include taking money to reassign seats, nor does it include humiliating a passenger. Brian smirked. You got proof of a bribe. Karen opened her laptop and pressed play. The screen displayed the footage Victoria Hale slipping an envelope into Ashley's hand, her eyes full of silent understanding, Brian giving a small nod of approval. The audio boomed through the room like thunder. Thank you for fixing this. Victoria's voice purred smooth as silk, laced with privilege. No one spoke. Ashley covered her mouth as tears welled up. I didn't mean to. I needed the money for tuition. I know it was wrong. Please, Karen cut her off. You weren't wrong once. You were wrong the moment you stayed silent. She turned to Rick. And you, Captain Dawson? Why did you allow them to remove a paying passenger? Rick exhaled. I trusted my crew. I didn't see the whole picture. I thought he was causing trouble. Karen's eyes narrowed. You thought that, or you wanted to think that Rick had no answer. He simply bowed his head. After a long pause, Karen stood and took 3 white envelopes from her folder. The board's decision has been signed. All 3 of you are terminated immediately, effective now. All benefits are suspended, pending further legal review. Ashley broke down in tears. Brian slammed his hand on the table. This isn't fair. Everyone in the industry does this. We just got unlucky and got filmed. Karen didn't flinch. Maybe, but the one who does wrong in front of a camera is the one who must answer to justice. When 2 security officers entered the room, Ashley cried out, pleading, Please give me another chance. I want to make it right. I'll do anything. Karen looked at her, a faint sadness flickering in her eyes. Your second chance will come, Parker. But not today. Not here. The words landed like a sentence. Brian shouted as the guards led him out. We're just scapegoats. Apex is putting on a show to save their stock price. They'll forget us in a week, but... His voice faded as the door closed behind him. Rick rose last. He said nothing, only placed his worn pilot badge on the table. I thought I understood what responsibility meant. He murmured. Today I realized I never did. He walked out slowly, as quietly as a dying sunset. When they were gone, Karen sat alone. She opened her phone and read the latest headline. Apex Air officially terminates 3 employees involved in Apex injustice case. Below it were hundreds of thousands of comments applauding the decision. But Karen felt no relief. She knew this was only the surface of something deeper, a disease called bias and blind power. Upstairs, Michael Turner remained in a meeting with the executive board. He looked through the glass window and saw 3 figures shrinking in the distance below, a young woman with her head down, a defiant man still struggling, and an old pilot walking slowly like an autumn breeze. He felt no satisfaction, only heaviness. Because he understood justice was never about vengeance. It was about restoring balance so that others wouldn't suffer the same fate. Natalie walked up beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. They'll pay for what they did, she said. Michael shook his head gently. Paying for it is the easy part. Learning from it is the hard one. That evening, the 8 o'clock news was filled with images of the dismissals. People commented, shared, celebrated. But one short clip went mostly unnoticed, a brief interview with Michael, when a reporter asked Mr. Turner, "Are you satisfied that they were fired?" He looked into the camera, his eyes tired yet clear. No. I take no joy in seeing anyone lose their livelihood. I only hope that from now on, every airline, every service worker, Every person who holds power in their hands will learn to use that power to lift others up, not to push them down. Night fell. In a small apartment in Dallas, Ashley sat curled up on a chair, her eyes fixed on the television. The image of Michael speaking on the news made her break down in tears. Not out of anger, but out of shame. She remembered his eyes on the plane, calm without hatred. And it was that calmness that made her realize how far she had drifted from what was right. In that fragile moment, she opened her laptop and began typing an email. "Mr. Turner, I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to relearn how to see people with respect. If there's any program that allows me to make things right, please let me know. I'll join." She pressed send and buried her face in her hands. She didn't know if he would ever read it, but for the first time in months, her heart felt awake. Meanwhile, in his Atlanta office, Michael sat quietly reading through his new messages. His eyes stopped at one email subject line. He opened it, read slowly, and a faint smile appeared. It wasn't the smile of victory, but of understanding the kind that comes when you realize justice truly begins only when those who did wrong decide to change. Outside, the Atlanta night sky was clear as crystal. An Apex Air jet lifted into the clouds, its lights blinking softly against the dark. Michael watched it rise and whispered, "Fly right this time." 3 days after what the media had called Judgment Day, the atmosphere inside Apex Air headquarters was completely different. The hallways that once echoed with chatter and laughter now held only cautious footsteps and fleeting glances. On the wall, a massive screen displayed a single sentence that everyone could read. "We failed to respect our passengers. Now it's time to relearn how to be human. Michael Turner." No one knew who had put it there, but no one dared take it down. In the conference room on the 20th floor, Michael stood before the airline's top executives, Andrew Collins, the CEO, Linda Torres, the CFO, and Megan Ortiz, the Director of Communications. The air carried no hostility, only a heavy silence filled with reflection. "Starting today," Michael said, his voice deep but steady. "Apex Air begins a 6-month cultural reform. We cannot erase mistakes with statements. We must correct them with action." He clicked to the first slide. On the screen appeared the words, "Project Redefine, redefining how we fly." Michael's plan was divided into 3 phases. Phase 1. Face the truth. Every employee must complete the Unmasking Bias course, a program to uncover unconscious prejudice in customer service. Phase 2. Practice fairness. Equitas AI's technology will be integrated into Apex systems to monitor customer feedback and automatically flag any potential signs of discrimination. Phase 3. Rebuild trust. Each month, executive leaders will fly anonymously as regular passengers to experience the system they created. The room fell silent. No one spoke, but everyone understood this wasn't just a training initiative. It was a spiritual overhaul. "The cost will be enormous," Linda said quietly. "How much?" Andrew asked. Michael looked them straight in the eyes. "Around $25 million. But if we don't do it, the cost will be far greater. The cost of dignity and the company itself." There was a long pause. Then Andrew nodded. "Do it." A few days later, the program began. Apex Air employees, flight attendants, technicians, office managers lined up outside training rooms. They were instructed to pause all work for 3 days to relearn what should have been obvious respect, listening and seeing the human being beyond the uniform, the skin tone, or the accent. Michael personally attended the first session. On stage, he didn't use a microphone. He spoke with calm, genuine warmth. "I don't want any of you to feel accused. I want you to understand the weight of the moment when someone is made to feel like they don't belong. I've lived that moment, and I don't want anyone else to." In the audience, heads bowed. A young flight attendant wiped tears from her eyes. A white male employee at the back whispered to his co-worker, "I used to think I was fair. Maybe I never really understood what that word meant." The room was silent. When the session ended, people rose to their feet and applauded. Not because they were told to, but because for the first time, they felt their company had a heart. Meanwhile, Equitas AI's system was being installed at Apex's data center. A network of algorithms began analyzing millions of interactions daily, detecting patterns of potential bias. If a passenger was served slower than others without reason, the system would flag it. If an employee received excessive tips from a particular group of passengers, the system would suggest reviewing the process. If negative feedback clustered around a specific demographic, a report would go directly to Michael. It wasn't just technology, it was conscience encoded. The global media took notice. CNN and BBC, Forbes and Time magazine all hailed Michael Turner as the man rewriting the rules of aviation. Andrew Collins, once a man driven solely by profit, now stood before his employees with a completely different message. "I've lost sleep these past nights, not because of the stock price, but because I realized how blind I've been. From now on, Apex Air won't just carry passengers, it will carry respect." His words were published on the company's homepage and spread across LinkedIn like a manifesto for change. But not everyone was on board. A small group of veteran employees called it a morality performance. An anonymous post appeared on the internal forum. Apex cares more about its image than efficiency. We're bowing to the media. When the post went viral, Michael didn't respond publicly. Instead, he sent one simple email to the entire company. "If bowing to what's right costs us our reputation, then that reputation was never worth keeping." The message spread like fire, quiet but cleansing. 3 weeks passed. The first metrics came in. Customer complaints down 47%. Positive feedback up 64%. 92% of employees voluntarily enrolled in the ethics program. On social media, a new hashtag began to rise. Hashtag Apex Rising. Apex is rising again. People began to speak of the airline not as a scandal, but as a symbol of rebirth. Late one evening, long after everyone had gone home, Michael remained in his 20th floor office. He scrolled through reports, then stopped at a new message notification. Email Ashley Parker request to join retraining program. He read it and a faint smile crossed his face. "A second chance," he murmured. On his screen, he typed a reply. "Hello, Ashley. We'll be launching the Second Chance program next month. If you truly want to change, come. Not to return to your old job, but to rebuild yourself." He pressed send. Outside the window, the city of Dallas glittered under the night sky. Apex airplanes streaking across the horizon, their lights trailing like promises reborn. Andrew walked in, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You know," he said, "I used to think reform was impossible. Now I realize it started with one man who refused to leave his seat." Michael smiled softly. "It wasn't about the seat, Andrew. It was about the people who were never allowed to sit in it." The 2 men stood quietly gazing out toward the runway, where the blinking lights resembled the heartbeat of an airline brought back to life. As the clock struck 11, Michael closed his laptop and gathered his papers. He didn't know what the future would hold, but in that moment he knew one thing for certain. Justice had begun to fly, and this time it was flying first class. 3 months after the scandal, the name Apex Air was no longer spoken as a stain, but as a miracle of transformation. Yet for Ashley Parker, every time she heard a plane take off, it still cut through her chest like a blade. She lived quietly in a small, cheap apartment on the outskirts of Dallas, scrolling through endless news about Apex rising the airline's remarkable rebirth under Michael Turner's Project Redefine. Every time she saw his face on television, calm, confident, celebrated across the world as the symbol of modern justice, she felt both admiration and shame. One morning, while working her temporary job as a waitress at a small cafe near the airport, her co-worker called out, "Hey, look at this." On the phone screen, the headline was clear: Equitas AI launches Second Chance, a program for those who once failed in the service industry. Beneath it was Michael Turner's photo, with his quote, "No one can redeem themselves if the world shuts its doors on them. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's giving people the chance to learn how to be human again." Ashley's hands trembled. She read the description: an 8-week program designed to retrain former service workers dismissed for biased behavior, focusing on ethical service fairness and career restoration. She knew it was meant for her. A week later, Ashley walked into the headquarters of the Equitas Foundation, no longer in her flight attendant uniform, but in a simple white blouse, worn shoes, and eyes carrying both remorse and hope. The orientation took place in a small meeting room. About 20 participants sat together, each with their own story. Someone who had insulted a customer, someone fired for discriminating against a co-worker, someone who stayed silent when they should have spoken up. The instructor began, "None of you are innocent. But if you are here, it means you've chosen to face your mistakes instead of running from them." Ashley sat in the back row. When her name was called, she simply bowed her head and whispered, "Present." The first lesson was titled, "The Price of Silence." On the screen appeared the same footage that had destroyed her life the moment she accepted money from Victoria Hale. She saw her own face again, the forced smile, the uneasy eyes, the trembling hand clutching the envelope. The room was silent. She felt as if a million eyes were staring through her, judging her. But then the instructor said softly, "Don't look at the person in that video as a villain. Look at her as a lesson. No one is born evil. Sometimes they just stay silent at the wrong moment." Those words pierced her heart, painful but awakening. In the second week, each participant was asked to share the most shameful moment of their career. Ashley stood up, her hands clasped tightly. "I used to think respect was something you could buy with tips," she said. "I was wrong. I forgot that sometimes just looking someone in the eye and saying, 'Thank you, sir,' is enough to make them feel human." The room fell silent for a few seconds, then erupted in applause. Not polite applause, but the kind that comes from understanding. After 6 weeks, the program entered its final phase practice. The participants were sent to airports and small airlines for field training. Ashley was assigned to the customer service counter at Fort Worth Airport. Each day she served hundreds of travelers, young, old, and some who recognized her, their eyes cold as they remembered the flight attendant from that video. She didn't react. She only bowed her head and said, "Thank you for giving me the chance to serve you." At first, people thought it was an act, but slowly, her sincerity began to change the air around her. One elderly passenger, who had once scolded her after recognizing her from the video, eventually smiled and said, "You've truly changed. I can see it in your eyes." On graduation day, the group sat together in a circle. The coordinator spoke. "We don't give out forgiveness certificates here. We simply acknowledge that you've been brave enough to face your own mistakes." When it was Ashley's turn to speak, she didn't say much. She just opened her phone and read a line from an old email Michael Turner had sent her. Words she now knew by heart. "If you truly want to change, come. Not to reclaim your old job, but to rebuild yourself." Her voice cracked. "And today I believe I've done that." After the ceremony, as everyone was leaving, a man stepped forward. The familiar grey suit, the calm, steady smile, Michael Turner. Ashley stood up, her heart racing. "Mr. Turner." He raised his hand, gently stopping her. Not Mr. and Miss anymore, just two people who've both learned something about respect. He glanced around the room, then back at her. "Thank you for coming back. This program only works because of people brave enough to face it like you." Ashley's voice trembled. "I don't deserve your thanks." Michael smiled. "No one deserves forgiveness, but everyone deserves a chance to be better." The following week, Apex Air launched its new campaign, From Error to Empathy, Tu Sai Lam Gen Thao Cam. The media ran stories about the Second Chance program, highlighting Ashley Parker's journey. She was no longer the disgraced face of prejudice, but a woman with bright eyes, sharing how she learned respect from the very man she had once disrespected. The press called her a symbol of redemption. But for Ashley, the title meant nothing. All she wanted was to keep moving forward, live with integrity, and use her story to remind others never to look down on anyone, not even for a second. One afternoon, she received a message. "Welcome to Apex Air's Employee Ethics Training Team. Your contract begins Monday. Michael Turner." She stared at the words as tears fell onto her keyboard. She had lost everything, yet somehow found something far more valuable, her dignity. Outside her window, a plane soared through the sunset sky. For the first time in months, Ashley smiled as she watched it. There was no more fear. Only faith that sometimes justice isn't about punishment. It's about giving people the chance to be born again. 6 months after the Second Chance program officially launched, Apex Air had transformed so completely that even its harshest skeptics had to admit this was no longer the same airline it once was. The main lobby of its Dallas headquarters now glowed with natural light. The walls were lined with photographs of real employees beneath a bold inscription that read, "Every flight, every heart moi chuyen bei, mot trai tim." And in the very center of that wall hung a photo of Ashley Parker, not as a flight attendant, but in the moment she was leading a group of new trainees in the class Empathy in Service. Her smile was no longer timid. It was the smile of someone who had fallen to the bottom and climbed back up with her own hands. That morning, she was teaching a group of young instructors. "Respect doesn't begin when the passenger walks in," she said softly but firmly. "It begins when you look inside yourself and ask, why am I serving?" A young man raised his hand hesitantly. "Miss Parker, if a passenger treats us badly, don't we have the right to be angry?" She smiled. "Of course you do. But anger doesn't give you the right to respond with contempt. When you return respect to someone who doesn't deserve it, you're not doing it for them. You're doing it for your own character." The room fell silent. Then, slowly, heads began to nod, as if they had just remembered something simple, yet long forgotten. At the same time, on the upper floor, Michael Turner was in a meeting with CEO Andrew Collins and a panel of international advisors. Apex Air's reform had rippled through the entire industry. Delta United American Airlines all had sent representatives to study the Equitos integration system, the AI network developed by Michael and his team to track behavioral bias. Who would have thought, Andrew said, his tone a mix of pride and humility, that out of a crisis we could become an example? Michael smiled. Crisis doesn't destroy people, Andrew. It only strips away what they pretend to be. And sometimes shame is the fire that makes us want to become better. After the meeting, Michael walked down to the training center where Ashley was finishing her class. He stood quietly at the doorway, watching. There was no trace left of the anxious young woman from years ago. In front of him was a confident instructor, eyes bright, voice steady, inspiring. When the class ended, Ashley noticed him and gasped softly. "When did you get here, since you said respect begins with looking inward?" Michael replied with a small smile. That was a good line. Ashley lowered her head, smiling shyly. "If you hadn't sent that email back, then I'd probably still be running away." Michael shook his head. "I only opened the door. Walking through it was your choice." That same day, news broke across the aviation world. The Global Service Alliance announced that Apex Air had been awarded the Humanitarian Reform Airline of the Year. Reporters flooded the ceremony. Cameras, flashing microphones, extended questions pouring in. When Michael took the stage, the spotlight illuminated his face. Behind him stood hundreds of Apex employees in their new uniforms, and among them, Ashley, standing front row, smiling peacefully. "Thank you for this honor," Michael began. "But the real recognition doesn't belong to me. It belongs to those who had the courage to look at themselves. Because to change a company, you need policy. But to change a culture, you need courage." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. Justice isn't built by rules. It's built by every glance, every word, every small choice between staying silent and standing up. The entire hall rose to its feet, erupting in applause. That night after the ceremony, Michael and Ashley stood together on the hotel balcony overlooking the glittering Dallas skyline. They were silent for a while, the breeze carrying the metallic scent of the runway from afar. "You know," Ashley said quietly, "when I was still a flight attendant, I used to think fairness was something for politicians, lawyers, or people with power. Now I know it starts with the smallest things, like a flight attendant saying, 'Good morning,' to every passenger, not just the ones in suits." Michael chuckled. "Exactly. That's the kind of justice that doesn't need a courtroom." He turned to her. "And you've become a symbol of that. You proved that redemption doesn't come through tears, but through action." Ashley was silent for a moment, then asked softly, "Do you ever get tired? Carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders?" Michael smiled faintly, his eyes distant. "Of course I do. But whenever I feel tired, I think of people like you, those who once fell and chose to rise again. And I know this fight is worth it." The following week, Michael appeared on national television in the program Leadership Beyond Power. The host asked, "What makes you most proud of this journey, the awards, the stock recovery, the fame?" Michael smiled gently. "No. What makes me proud is seeing people who once fell stand up without bowing their heads in shame. Because in a world where power often blinds us, compassion is the only thing that helps us see." The interview ended, but that sentence spread across social media, becoming a global slogan: "Kindness is the new strength." At Apex Air, the days that followed were filled with gratitude events. Employees shared their journeys, Passengers sent letters of thanks, and those once mistreated by the airline were invited back to witness the change. A middle-aged black woman wept at the check-in counter. I never thought I'd live to see the day I'd be welcomed like this. Nearby, Ashley smiled. She walked over, took the woman's hand gently, and said, "Neither did we. But now we believe it." Later that evening, Michael returned to his office and opened his inbox. Amid hundreds of congratulatory emails, one message made him stop. "I am Victoria Hale. I lost everything after what happened. But seeing you and Miss Parker today, I realize I need to start over. If the Second Chance program still has room, please let me join." Michael stared at the words for a long moment. Then he typed a simple reply. "The door has never closed to those who truly wish to walk through it." He pressed send and looked up toward the window, where the Texas sunset painted the sky red and planes lined up for takeoff. The evening sky blazed brilliantly. One by one, Apex airplanes lifted off their tails, leaving streaks of light like shining exclamation marks of a new chapter. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew an empire had changed, not through power, but through compassion. And somewhere among the clouds, justice seemed to be flying with them, calm, steady, and full of light. 1 year after the incident, the aviation world had changed. It was no longer a race for first-class seats, but a race for human dignity. Apex Air had become a case study at Harvard and Stanford, known everywhere as the Turner phenomenon. Michael Turner, the man once removed from Seat 1A, was now invited around the world to speak about leading with compassion and wisdom. But what made him proudest wasn't fame. It was seeing the very people who had once fallen now become beacons of light for others. At a symposium on ethics in service, Michael stepped off the stage to a wave of applause. In the front row, Ashley Parker was taking notes for her own upcoming lecture, now serving as Apex Air's Director of Ethical Service Training. Beside her sat Victoria Hale, the woman who once slipped a bribe into her hand, now quietly observing with a Second Chance trainee badge pinned to her chest. They had once stood on opposite ends of disgrace. Today they sat side by side, united by a shared purpose to pass on the lesson that had transformed their lives. When the session ended, Ashley approached Victoria and extended her hand. "Welcome," she said softly. "I know the road to redemption is long, but I believe you'll walk it all the way." Victoria clasped her hand, eyes glistening. "I used to think money could buy everything, but it turns out only kindness can make people look at you with respect." Behind them, Michael watched and smiled. He knew that justice was no longer his battle alone. It had become a legacy, a current flowing quietly yet powerfully through others. That afternoon, as the final rays of sunlight reflected off the Apex Air logo atop the building, Michael looked up at the sky, where planes carved glowing trails across the horizon. His voice, low and steady, carried like a message to everyone who had ever been underestimated. Don't let anyone define your worth by the seat you sit in or the color of your skin. Let your character be the only ticket that takes you far. Somewhere among those clouds, perhaps his father was smiling, and for the first time, Michael Turner felt that he wasn't just flying. He was helping lift the whole world a little higher. 2 years after the historic incident, the skies over America glowed brilliantly on a special day, the day of Apex Flight 1000. The first flight in history operated entirely by graduates of the Second Chance program. From pilots and flight attendants to ground staff, Every person on that crew had once stumbled, had once been rejected by society. Now they stood together in sleek silver-blue uniforms, wearing the new apex insignia, Wings of Redemption, the Wings of Redemption. In the first-class cabin, Michael Turner sat quietly by the window. He wasn't a VIP, not a shareholder, just a passenger like anyone else. But this time, the looks directed at him were no longer suspicious or judgmental. They were warm, welcoming smiles from the very people he had once given a second chance. Before takeoff, the captain stepped out of the cockpit. Rick Dawson, the same man who had been dismissed 2 years earlier, now reinstated after retraining and community service. His voice filled the cabin over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Rick Dawson. Years ago, I caused a passenger to lose his faith in us. Today, I return to prove that sometimes the most valuable thing isn't the right to fly a plane, but the chance to do what's right." The cabin fell silent. Then soft applause began to spread, not loud, but heartfelt, rippling from seat to seat, like the shared heartbeat of people who had been broken but refused to stay down. The aircraft lifted off. Sunlight streamed through the clouds, reflecting in Michael's eyes. Ashley, now director of training, approached with a gentle smile. "Mr. Turner, thank you for flying with us." He replied, "No thank you to you, and everyone who had the courage to change." They sat in silence for a moment, both gazing out the window. Below, the world grew smaller, and all the old boundaries of skin status and past mistakes seemed to dissolve in the golden light. When the plane reached cruising altitude, the captain's voice returned. "This isn't just Apex's flight. This is the flight of every soul who believes that compassion can soar." Michael looked up toward the cabin ceiling and smiled. On the passenger screens, a message appeared in bright letters. "Welcome aboard Flight 1000. Destination, a better world." The plane pierced through the golden clouds, leaving behind a long, radiant trail, like a shining exclamation mark at the end of a journey that had finally come full circle. From the perspective of an expert in leadership culture and professional ethics, Michael Turner's journey is more than just the story of a flight. It is a metaphor for the journey of humanity itself, the path from judgment to understanding, from power to compassion. He chose not revenge, but reconstruction. He never used power to bring others down, but to lift them up. And in that choice, justice found its truest form, not as punishment, but as transformation. Because sometimes the world doesn't need more rules. It simply needs a heart big enough to truly see one another. If you believe that compassion can change an entire system, hit like to spread that message and subscribe to our channel to follow more stories where human dignity is tested by prejudice. Before you go, leave a comment below with a phrase that reflects your belief in what is right. Keep your dignity.